So this morning, for our plenary this morning, it's great to welcome Stephen Degraer. Stephen's been involved in INSITE's phase 1, it's great to see him back. Stephen's the team leader and coordinator of the Marine Ecology and Management team at the Institute of Natural Sciences in Belgium. He has a plethora of published research across a range of ecosystems around the world, from tropical habitats to marine benthos and avifauna, and a strong focus on nature conservation and the sustainable use and exploitation of marine resources. You'll have seen over the last day, I saw Stephen's papers come up several times, and so it's great to have him here talking. And his research is focused on species distribution from offshore wind farm marine monitoring programs, marine planning and management, and implementation challenges of ecosystem-based management in the marine spatial planning process, and a lot of experience on the environmental effects of marine artificial structures. So we're great to have him here today. Stephen, thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me? Does this thing work? But I wasn't going to use this thing. No? It does work. This works better. Okay, then I stay here. Fine. So thanks for the introduction. What I would like to talk to you about this morning is actually about nature-inclusive design. Nature-inclusive design of marine artificial structures. We have been talking about nature-inclusive designs yesterday. We will talk about that today as well. We know that it will have some bearing onto what we do during the decommissioning phase of these marine artificial structures as well. So, and actually, you know, I have been thinking about those things and talking about it with many people for the last probably 4, 5, 6 years. And this should go backwards. And actually, all of a sudden I started to think maybe we should hold our horses. What is it we are really doing? And hold our horses, you can see there's an exclamation mark there and a question mark. That is because I'm not sure about what we should do with it, what it does mean, and that's exactly what this presentation will be all about. It also has the why in between brackets. The reason there is that I do not blame anyone for not holding their horses, because I think it's our shared responsibility to hold our horses and to carefully think about what nature-inclusive design is. So that's why I have this complicated title here. Okay, nature-inclusive design. I know that I shouldn't do that, because if you put a lot of text on slides, people start to read all that text. The only thing I want to show here is that if you talk about nature-inclusive design or you talk about biodiversity-inclusive design, is that many people have different ideas about what it is. So there's a lot of definitions you can easily get from the internet. And I think the one that you're all aware of is probably the first one. It entails options that can be integrated in or added to the design of infrastructure to create suitable habitat for native species. We talked about that yesterday as well. You know, think about the non-native species we talked about, or communities whose natural habitat has been degraded or reduced. And that's the one from Wetteveen and Bos. I think that is a report that is probably known to many of you. But if you go down, if you look at the very last one over here, it's a very simple one. It's like, okay, well, it leads to a healthier and more beautiful living environment where people and animals live in harmony. So, and you have everything in between. So all depends on who it is that is thinking about nature-inclusive design. You end up with another definition of what it is. So we have started thinking about, okay, what could our definition be? And that's how we try to put it in a very simple way of defining what nature-inclusive design is. Nature-inclusive design creates optimized artificial habitat to locally enhance biodiversity. And there's a couple of words in there that may need some further explanation. The first one is creates. It creates something, which means that it is something that is unnatural that is being created. It's not nature that is building something. It is something we add to the environment, so we create. It's optimized, that's a very important one, and I will come back to that later on during this presentation as well. It is not a goal by itself. Think about an oil and gas rig. You may add nature-inclusive design to an oil and gas rig, but the nature-inclusive design itself is not the goal. The oil and gas rig is the goal. It's about getting the oil from the seafloor, right? So it's an optimization of something that we would put there anyhow, right? It's an artificial habitat, which means that it is habitat creation. We create new habitats. Yeah. Locally, it is in between brackets because it is not always locally, but if you think about the effects of nature-inclusive design, they usually are quite locally. It's kind of, they are restricted to the structure itself and maybe the first few tens of meters around the structure. And it's about enhancing biodiversity, and biodiversity, all life forms and functions. I will come back to that later on as well, because biodiversity is quite often, narrowed down to species richness. And species richness, as we will see later on, probably is the worst descriptor of biodiversity, or at least of valued biodiversity. Okay, nature-inclusive design is not something that is derived from the marine environment. We are having nature-inclusive designs already implemented in the terrestrial environment for a very long time. Think about a garden shed, as you can see here. Actually, what you do is we add like places for or shelters for hedgehogs and for bats. We can build, or we can design some sort of a meadow on the rooftop, which may be beneficial to butterflies. We can have nest boxes for humblebees and for house sparrows. All of that can be integrated into our garden shed. And the whole idea behind that is that we actually offer space for natural assets like the species that are depicted here that would occur in those locations naturally. Think about an open deciduous forest. We cut the deciduous forest, we build our houses, and we add room, or we add space for those species. If you go a little bit further, this is where you can end up with that is still, still existing, but you still add, aspects of our natural deciduous forest to our built environment, and you can take it even further down. This does not yet exist. Well, it does exist. I think Singapore has something that is very much similar to what you see here. Fine. But then if you think about the marine environment, we may actually lose track. So here what you can see is all sorts of nature-inclusive designs as they are depicted in the case of an offshore wind farm. And you can see that, we have these cot hotels, add-on, which is actually an optimization of the pile, the monopile of this wind turbine. We can have optimized scour protection layers. We can have fish hotels that may be linked to actually the anchors of a floating turbine. But we also have standalone units, and those standalone units, those are actually adding artificial habitats. That is not longer an optimization of the structure itself. It's not an optimization of the scour protection, nor of the foundation itself. It is something that we add to the natural environment. And what I mean is that we may lose track here is that, and that is not always the case, but think about particularly southern North Sea or the wider North Sea actually as a whole. Most of the North Sea is sedimented environment. It's soft sediment, it's sand, it's mud, that sort of things. It's not hard substrate. I do know that there are places with hard substrates, naturally prevailing hard substrates, but in many cases we are constructing those offshore, those marine artificial structures in a soft sediment environment. So we think that we kind of do good to nature, but actually we are completely artificializing this environment, turning a soft sediment environment into hard substrate environment. And that is different. And that is shown here. So where we started with is we integrate what was naturally prevailing. We had a deciduous forest, we cut it, we build our houses, and then we start thinking, well, maybe this is not the best way on how we want to live, and that may not be the place where where we can start thinking about nature restoration. So we actually add aspects of the deciduous forest into our built environment. Boost biodiversity at any cost is then here. We start off with a soft sediment environment, the sandbank area. We have artificial hard structures in there, an oil and gas rig, and an offshore wind farm. And we see that, we see a lot of animals growing onto these piles. So let's take one step further and let's add more rock to it. Yeah, and that is completely different. Okay, and that's why I think that we should hold our horses, we should stop and think. And a concept that may be useful to think about how people are interacting with the marine environment is like that. We have balanced ecosystem here. I know there was a question here about, how does nature look like and that sort of things. I try to avoid it, and that is why I call it a balanced ecosystem. This can raise a lot of discussion. We're not going to have that discussion, so I will not take any questions on that. But it is something that, okay, you should look at it like that. If with the situation where we're in now, if we remove all human pressures, how would the system restore itself into something that is balanced, taking account of the non-native species that are around and that we'll never get rid of as well. So that's what I mean with this balanced ecosystem. Now, if we have human activities, we know that our activities like these an oil and gas rig will do some harm to the marine environment. So we are actually lowering the value or the ecosystem services delivery, you could also say, compared to the balanced ecosystem. But of course, since we are aware of that, we try to take maximum action to mitigate those negative impacts, and eventually, if we could nullify these negative impacts, and actually that would be the best thing to do. So that's fine, and that's what we do mitigate. That's what we call mitigating the bad. And that is something that has always been there since we started talking about environmental impact assessments, you know. And that is already from the 1970s. We try to mitigate the bad. Yeah. But we all know, of course, that this may not be enough. That there may also be a need for action to actually try to get from this lowered value back to the balanced ecosystem. And that is what we do when we talk about restoration. Yeah. Restoration, passive restoration, just remove the pressure, see what happens. Active restoration, as we want to speed up restoration. And Murray Roberts yesterday, when he was talking about these Lophelia reefs, you know, that is trying to actually speed up the restoration of these reefs, simply because it would take decades if we would go for the passive restoration. And then there's also this aspect that I call creation. That is, we actually want to boost some ecosystem assets beyond what would be naturally prevailing. And that's where the nature-inclusive designs also come in. So that is what I call promoting the good. And if you think about nature-inclusive design, they come in at two places. It's not only about creation, about, you know, adding, or it's not only about the, you know, boosting biodiversity beyond what would be naturally prevailing. It may also be in terms of the active restoration. And again, the Lophelia example that was given yesterday is perfectly fit in there. Now, and then how to think about the nature-inclusive design. What I propose is to have a look at nature-inclusive design in a trichotomy type of way. That is, to make a distinction between restorative nature-inclusive design and creative nature-inclusive design. Restorative, going from lowered value to the balanced ecosystem. Creative, taking one step beyond to an added value beyond what would naturally be there, right? And in creative nature-inclusive design, you can make a distinction between optimizing infrastructure and add-on structures. Optimizing infrastructure is that you have a construction out there, the construction is there with its very good reasons, and it is designed in a way that it will support what it has to do, being drilling oil, for example. But you can optimize those structures as to also allow for added values, added biodiversity values. Or you can think about add-on structures, and add-on structures then are, think about an offshore wind turbine. We have an offshore wind turbine, there's a lot of space in between the piles, so let's dump some concrete pipes because Cod loves it. That is something that is not needed for the functioning of the offshore wind farm. It is simply something that we think would do good to nature, right? Those are the add-on structures. Now, if you look at them or you compare the three types, then restorative nature-inclusive design is about measures to facilitate and speed up nature restoration. We talked about that already. That is about boosting biodiversity beyond what nature would be would deliver. Restorative nature-inclusive design, by definition, will focus on naturally occurring ecosystem assets. Yeah. So it would be about, for example, restoring oyster reefs where oyster reefs were prevailing like 100 or 150 years ago. So it is about naturally occurring ecosystem assets. While here we talk about artificially created ecosystem assets. Yeah? So think about rocky environments in a soft sediment environment is something that we artificially create. And you think about what that means, then you make a distinction between restorative nature-inclusive design, but for sure it will be a gain. Well, we will have a gain of locally natural ecosystem assets, optimizing infrastructure, no gain, no loss of the local ecosystem, of the locally natural ecosystem assets, because the structures will be there anyhow, so you just optimize what is there already. While actually, if you think about the add-on structures, then you actually do harm to what was naturally prevailing, right? And then the last thing about that is that the restorative nature inclusive design, if you think about nature restoration, then actually you envisage an eternal effect. You're not going to remove anything. Well, you're not going to take action to restore nature and then say after 30, 40 years, okay, let's remove everything. No, you really aim for an eternal effect, which is not the case for creative, or which is not necessarily the case for creative nature inclusive design. And that's where we touch upon, marine artificial structure decommissioning strategies. What is it we should do? And I think that that is some sort of dichotomy that may help us thinking about what it is we're going to do. Now, greenwashing, green consumerism, I think we all want to avoid greenwashing, and we want to go to green consumerism, and there is room in there for nature inclusive design, but we have to be careful with it. If we go back to the example of, okay, we have a 10-fold species richness if we add artificial hard substrate, but it is ecosystem, those are species that were actually not going to naturally prevail, then probably we are closer to the greenwashing than to the green consumerism. I do accept that this is unintentional. Yeah? It's not intentional, it's unintentional, but it gets close to greenwashing, while we want to get to green consumerism. And how to take that step is actually to be very clear about what the objectives are of the nature inclusive design and the methods that you will apply. So first, think about what is it you want to achieve. You can discuss about it. You can see whether you get whether society agrees with that. You can have open discussion about it, and then you can move forward with that and have these and have the nature inclusive design implemented. And I'm just going to touch upon two aspects here: that's species richness versus biodiversity, and then structural versus functional ecosystem assets. As I said before, species richness, it's like the common denominator of biodiversity. And the reason for that is that not all of us are marine biologists or are biologists. Biologists know that, of course, biodiversity entails quite a lot of, many more aspects than species richness. But of course, people who did not study biology or who do not know anything about biology, okay, how to communicate to those people. And then we go down to the lowest common denominator, and that is species richness. And that's where things go wrong with nature inclusive design. We feel like, okay, we used to have 30 species, soft sediment species, we add rocks to it, we kind of triple or quadruple the number of species, and we are very happy about that, so let's move on with that. And that's where we have to think much better. What species are we talking about? Why would we need them, and so on? If that would be the case, that species richness would be was the thing to be maximized, then actually what we should do is we should turn all our sandy beaches into rocky shores. Yeah. And we all know that that would be a very bad idea, because we would lose like half of the place production. Yeah. So we are not going to do that. Yeah. But that's how far as you could go. That's actually what biodiversity is. I'm not going to go through all of these schemes, but those are all different parts that are linked to structural aspects of structural descriptors of biodiversity, functional descriptors, and compositional descriptors. And then the last thing I want to touch upon is the structural versus functional ecosystem assets. For way too long, we have been thinking about boosting structural aspects with our nature inclusive design. And we do that for example, to boost or to provide hope to species of commercial interest, like cod, plaice, or European lobsters, or species of conservation interest, like the European flat oyster or Spiruliosa. Well, the species themselves are not that important, but it's actually the habitat they create that is important. Same with Lophelia. So, okay, fine, we can do that, but we could take one step further. And now we're also going to touch upon making that distinction between attraction and production. We can actually design our nature inclusive designs in such a way that we create habitat, be it either biogenic or geogenic, to actually touch upon or to add, to create spawning grounds, foraging grounds, nursery grounds. Those sorts of functional aspects are very clear. You know what the goal is, and you're going to design your, for example, a scar protection layer in such a way that it provides spawning ground opportunities for elasmobranchs, for sharks and rays. And that's, of course, at that point, you cannot longer talk about, well, are they attracted, or are they really producing? Because you're offering them that space that is needed for them to reproduce. So they will add to the productions aspect, right? Another question, and that's a whole other discussion about, okay, well, how meaningful is it if we only have like 0.000% of the North Sea that may be optimized as a spawning ground for elasmobranchs? How much does that contribute to the population dynamics of all the sharks and rays? That, of course, is another kind of discussion. Okay, so to summarize, offshore nature-inclusive design aims at creating optimized artificial habitat to locally enhance biodiversity. You may not agree with that definition, that's fine, and I would happily listen to your arguments for that. Nature-inclusive design, this trichotomy, I think there is value in adopting this trichotomy, making the distinction between restorative and creative, and then within creative, the optimized infrastructure and the add-on structures. And then I think that we also have to know that when we opt for nature-inclusive design, that we have to make those choices. They have to be made very explicit. So, and nature-inclusive design inspired by the natural local environment for sure is a good one. We have to think about very carefully what we are doing if we design these NIDs to go beyond what was natural or what the local natural environment can offer. And then, again, those choices have to be made very explicit. So we have to talk about what is it, the effect that you are striving for, what are you going to do with that, and are we all happy with that? And that's where the hold our horses is actually sitting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and what a great keynote to open the first session of day 2. If you'd like to stick around for a couple of minutes, we've got about 5 minutes for questions from the room if anybody's got a question for Stephen.
Remember, I'm not going to answer any question on balanced ecosystems or during coffee break.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Very interesting. I'm Tom Wilding from SAMS. A couple of sort of points, really. I mean, you say that if you wanted to increase richness, we would replace sandy beaches by rocky shores. But I would pose that we would need to define what aspect of richness or biodiversity we were considering there, given that, the ciliate or the myobenthic communities associated with sandy beaches can be very high indeed. So there's an element of subjectivity in this that I think needs to be addressed. And in a sense you do, because you say you need to define your objectives first. And I think many people here would sort of visualize diversity as being those beautiful pictures of sort of anemones and soft corals and hard corals on structures. But that isn't the ecological reality of what richness or biodiversity is. And so there's an issue here about nature-inclusive design, in my view, in as much as it could be subjective and it's not ecologically founded. And I'd welcome a comment from you on that.
Yeah, this is not really a question, but indeed some sort of a reflection on what I just presented, Tom. I tried to follow what you said, and I think that I fully agree with what you just said as well, and probably that is what I brought in this presentation as well. There is subjectivity in there, and particularly now the subjectivity is there, particularly when we start talking about this creative part. There's a little subjectivity if it is about nature-inclusive design to actively restore nature and getting back to that balanced ecosystem. But as soon as we go beyond, then we carefully have to think about what it is we are going to do, why we want to do that, and that is a societal choice rather than an individual choice. Yeah, and that is why I also said that once you have your goals identified, it may be good to reach out to a wider community and ask them what they think about it. Because what you see in this scheme, I'm not sure whether I can quickly go back to it. Yeah, this one. What you see in this scheme is that if you move from a balanced ecosystem to the added value, I also have another version of that scheme, and it says there's a little or a smaller words below added value that is most likely of one ecosystem service, most likely at the expense of other ecosystem services, because we are changing something. Yeah, and there is little. Well, I do not know about any examples of creation of nature inclusive design that's creating something that will not go with the loss of other ecosystem aspects. And that is why this societal debate will be needed. Yeah. And that's where the subjectivity indeed comes in as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks. Great talk. Travis Olsen from Chevron. I'm just wondering, in the North Sea, are we beyond theory? Are there any practical implementations of this in the North Sea yet? And I only ask because we've got 2 projects that we're trying aspects of this. It's very, very early stages, and getting regulators and stakeholders on board has been slow and a long term coming. But I'm wondering, do you have any practical examples?
Practical examples of the 3 types of like this?
Of doing nature-inclusive designs on jackets or oil and gas infrastructure?
Oil and gas, well, that's also how I have been introduced. I'm particularly working with offshore wind farms. So oil and gas, I do not know. And offshore wind farms and anything that is like the offshore, the modular offshore grids, that sort of things. And there's a lot of examples of nature-inclusive design. Yeah, and those are cod hotel, optimized scour protection layers. Introduction of oysters, because we want to make use of the scar protection layer to actually have more propagules into the water to actually restore the oyster beds where they were naturally prevailing. So there's a lot of examples there, and there are examples along the 3 types. Restorative, the oyster example is one, but also the Ophelia beds, I think, is a very nice one that fits into restorative nature inclusive design. The optimized infrastructure, the cod hotels, the scar protection layer, and then the add-on structures exist as well. There's a wind farm in the Netherlands where they add concrete pipes. They dumped concrete pipes in between the turbines to provide a home for cod. Yeah. Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question.
Hi, Richard Stark. Is nature just not what is there today, accepting that it constantly changes, and it's also, those changes are unknowable? And therefore, if you're doing nature-inclusive design, you're just further enhancing the artificial environment that you have. And as humans are notoriously bad at managing any environment, would we not just be better to leave it alone, protect it in terms of stopping people doing things, let it get on with itself? That'd be cheaper, easier, and therefore more likely to happen.
Yes. I could simply say yes, but I would like to add something to that. That's right, but of course, we are exploiting the marine environment, and we will keep on exploiting the marine environment. So we better do that in a proper way, and we can do that, by mitigating the bad and then also promoting the good. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I think from your remark, what particularly is important here is that as we then start getting into the decommissioning debate, then we have to think about, should we removing everything, and actually also removing the nature that we have created artificially, while including while bringing in our nature-inclusive designs or not. And that's probably where that discussion has to be held. But to my opinion, indeed, and that is also a debate we have had in Belgium with regards to our offshore wind farms, with stakeholders, wide stakeholders, not only the offshore wind community, but also nature conservation organizations, scientists, administrations, representatives from many different industries. Actually, in the end, when we started this discussion, and it was like, I think it took us 1 year, 4 different workshops, one after the other, gradually building towards our common view on decommissioning. Then actually, when we started the discussions, we were pretty sure that biodiversity was very important. the created biodiversity was very important. And we completely left that track by the end of our discussion. And in the end, we ended up with, okay, well, the best thing we could do is to remove everything and let nature do its job. Rather than thinking that what we have created is something that is a very good thing and that should be maintained forever. And that's why we have this eternal effect for the restorative NID and then the temporary engagement that, that is there for the creative, nature-inclusive design. Yep.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.